Start with why fearlessness matters, because everything meaningful begins with a reason that is strong enough to move you when motivation disappears and doubt gets louder. Fear is universal. It shows up for everyone. But what separates those who transform their lives from those who remain stuck is not talent or luck. It is clarity of purpose. When a woman understands why she must move forward, fear no longer feels like a wall. It becomes something smaller, something manageable, something that can be walked through rather than avoided. The absence of fear is not the goal. The alignment with purpose is what creates momentum. There is a powerful truth that often goes unnoticed. Most people are not held back by fear itself. They are held back by the lack of a compelling reason to face it. When the reason is weak, fear feels overwhelming, but when the reason is strong, fear becomes secondary. This is why some people stay silent when they should speak, settle when they should rise, and hesitate when they should act. It is not because they are incapable, it is because their why has not been defined deeply enough to demand action. Fearlessness matters because it is the gateway to every opportunity that requires courage. Every meaningful change, every bold decision, every breakthrough moment sits on the other side of discomfort. And without a clear why, discomfort feels unnecessary. But with a strong why, discomfort becomes part of the process. It becomes something you expect rather than something you avoid. This shift in perspective changes how you approach challenges. It changes how you interpret failure, and it changes how you see yourself. When purpose leads, something remarkable happens internally. The voice of doubt does not disappear, but it loses authority. You begin to act not because you feel ready, but because you feel called. And that sense of calling creates consistency. It creates resilience. It builds a mindset that does not rely on perfect conditions. Instead of waiting for confidence, you begin to move with intention, trusting that clarity will come through action. There is also a ripple effect that comes from starting with why. When one woman chooses to act despite fear, she silently gives permission to others to do the same. Fearlessness becomes visible, and when it becomes visible, it becomes possible for more people. This is how change spreads, not through grand speeches, but through consistent, purposeful action that others can see and relate to. The strongest individuals are not the ones who never feel afraid. They are the ones who have decided that their mission matters more than their comfort. They understand that growth demands something from them, and they are willing to give it. They do not wait for the perfect moment because they know it does not exist. Instead, they create moments by choosing to act when it is difficult, when it is uncertain, and when it feels inconvenient. Starting with why also creates direction. Without it, effort becomes scattered and inconsistent. With it, every step has meaning, every challenge has context, every setback becomes a lesson rather than a reason to quit. This kind of mindset does not remove obstacles, but it transforms how obstacles are experienced. They become part of the journey rather than signs to turn back. Fearlessness matters because it is not just about individual success, it is about identity. It shapes how you see yourself and what you believe you are capable of. When you consistently act in alignment with a strong purpose, you begin to trust yourself more. That trust becomes the foundation for bigger decisions, bolder actions, and deeper growth. In the end, the question is never whether fear will show up. It always does. The real question is whether your reason is strong enough to keep you moving when it does. And when the why is clear, action becomes inevitable, progress becomes natural, and transformation becomes unavoidable. What fear means, because the way you interpret it will determine the direction of your life. Most people have been conditioned to see fear as a warning, as something that signals danger, something that should make them stop, hesitate, or turn back. But what if that interpretation is incomplete? What if fear is not a stop sign, but a signal that you are standing at the edge of growth? The difference between staying the same and evolving often comes down to this single shift in perspective. There is a powerful pattern that shows up again and again in human behavior. People tend to avoid the very things that could move their lives forward simply because those things feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is labeled as fear, and fear is labeled as something negative. But discomfort is not always a sign of something wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that something meaningful is happening. When you begin to understand this, fear starts to lose its control over your decisions. Fear often appears when you're about to do something that matters. It shows up before difficult conversations, before bold decisions, before stepping into unfamiliar territory. It is present when you're about to outgrow your current identity. That is not coincidence. Fear is closely tied to uncertainty, and uncertainty is where growth lives. If everything were predictable and easy, there would be no expansion, no transformation, no progress. The problem is not fear itself. The problem is the story we attach to it. When fear is interpreted as danger, it creates hesitation. When it is interpreted as an invitation, it creates curiosity. That shift from resistance to curiosity is where change begins. Instead of asking how to avoid fear, the question becomes, what is this fear trying to show me? That question opens a different path, one that leads forward instead of keeping you stuck. There is a strong truth that often goes unspoken. The people who achieve meaningful things are not fearless, they simply have a different relationship with fear. They do not wait for it to disappear, they move with it. They understand that fear is temporary, but the regret of inaction can last much longer. This understanding changes how they respond in critical moments. Instead of shrinking, they lean in. Instead of avoiding, they engage. Redefining fear also changes how you experience failure. When fear controls your perception, failure feels like proof that you should stop. But when fear is seen as part of growth, failure becomes feedback. It becomes information that helps you adjust, refine, and improve. This mindset removes the emotional weight that often holds people back. It allows you to keep moving without being defined by outcomes. Another important aspect of fear is that it often exaggerates risk. The mind tends to create worst-case scenarios, projecting outcomes that may never happen. This creates a false sense of danger that feels very real. But when you take action, you often realize that the situation is not as overwhelming as it seemed. Action has a way of reducing fear because it replaces imagination with experience. What once felt intimidating becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar loses its power to intimidate. Fear can also be a guide. It can point toward areas where you have potential that has not yet been explored. The things that scare you the most are often connected to the things that matter most. Speaking up, taking risks, pursuing something meaningful, these are not random sources of fear. They are connected to growth, to purpose, to becoming more than you currently are. When you redefine fear, you take back control. You stop allowing it to dictate your limits and start using it as a tool for expansion. You begin to recognize that fear is not something to eliminate, it is something to understand. And once you understand it, you can move through it with intention rather than being stopped by it. The shift is simple, but its impact is profound. Fear is no longer the barrier, it becomes part of the path. And when you see it that way, every moment of hesitation becomes an opportunity. Every challenge becomes a step forward, and every decision becomes a chance to grow into the person you are capable of becoming. Choose courage over approval, because the need to be accepted is one of the most silent forces shaping decisions, limiting potential, and keeping people from stepping into who they are capable of becoming. From an early stage, many are conditioned to seek validation, to fit in, to avoid rejection, and to measure their worth based on how others respond. This creates a pattern where choices are not driven by purpose, but by the desire to be liked, understood, or accepted. Over time, that pattern becomes a cage that looks comfortable on the outside, but restricts growth on the inside. There is a powerful observation that often goes unnoticed. The more you depend on approval, the less control you have over your own direction. When your actions are tied to the opinions of others, your confidence becomes unstable because it is built on something external. Approval can change, it can be withdrawn, it can be inconsistent, and when it is inconsistent, it creates hesitation. You begin to question your instincts, you delay decisions, and you hold back from taking necessary risks. Courage, on the other hand, shifts the source of control inward. It allows you to act based on values rather than reactions. It gives you the ability to make decisions that align with your purpose, even when they are misunderstood. Choosing courage does not mean ignoring feedback or isolating yourself from others. It means not allowing external voices to overpower your internal clarity. It is the difference between listening and depending. One of the strongest realities about growth is that it often requires standing alone, at least for a period of time. When you begin to change, when you raise your standards, when you step outside of expectations, not everyone will support it. Some may question it, some may resist it, and some may not understand it at all. This is where the choice becomes clear. You can either return to what is familiar to regain approval, or you can continue forward and build something meaningful. There is also a deeper layer to this. Approval can feel safe because it reduces the risk of rejection, but it also reduces the possibility of greatness. When you constantly adjust yourself to meet expectations, you dilute your originality. You become a version of yourself that fits in, rather than a version that stands out. And while fitting in may bring temporary comfort, it often comes at the cost of long-term fulfillment. Courage requires a different kind of mindset. It requires accepting that not everyone will agree with your path. It requires understanding that criticism is not always a signal to stop, but sometimes a reflection of others projecting their own limitations. When you see it this way, you begin to detach from the need to be universally accepted. You recognize that approval is not a reliable measure of whether something is right for you. There is a strong pattern among those who create meaningful change. They are willing to be misunderstood. They are willing to move forward without guarantees of support. This does not make their journey easier, but it makes it more authentic. And authenticity builds a different kind of confidence, one that is rooted in self-trust rather than external validation. Another important shift happens when you choose courage. You begin to take responsibility for your outcomes. Instead of waiting for permission, you create opportunities. Instead of seeking reassurance, you rely on preparation and action. This builds resilience because your progress is no longer dependent on how others respond. It becomes dependent on what you are willing to do consistently. Choosing courage also influences those around you. When people see someone act with conviction despite uncertainty, it challenges their own limitations. It shows that it is possible to step outside of expectations and still move forward. This creates a ripple effect where courage becomes visible. And when it becomes visible, it becomes attainable for others. The decision between courage and approval appears in small moments as much as in big ones. It shows up when you decide whether to speak or stay silent, whether to try or avoid, whether to follow your direction or adjust to fit expectations. These moments accumulate, and over time they shape identity. You either become someone who waits for permission or someone who creates their own path. Courage does not eliminate fear or doubt, but it changes your relationship with them. It allows you to act despite uncertainty. It allows you to move forward without needing constant reassurance. And in doing so, it creates a life that is aligned, intentional, and driven by purpose, rather than controlled by the shifting opinions of others. Build confidence through action. Because confidence is not something that appears before you begin. It is something that is created because you begin. Many people wait for a feeling of certainty before they move, believing that confidence is a prerequisite for action, but the reality is the opposite. Action is the foundation, and confidence is the result. When you reverse that order, you unlock progress that most people delay for far too long. There is a powerful pattern that shows up in growth. Clarity does not come from thinking alone, it comes from doing. The mind can only take you so far. It can imagine possibilities, but it also creates doubts, exaggerates risks, and amplifies uncertainty. Action cuts through that noise. It replaces overthinking with experience. It transforms unknowns into something tangible. And with every step you take, you gather evidence that you are capable, that you can adapt, and that you can handle more than you initially believed. Confidence is built in small moments long before it is visible in big ones. It is built when you speak, even when your voice feels uncertain. It is built when you take a step forward, even when the outcome is unclear. It is built when you follow through on commitments you make to yourself. These moments may seem insignificant on their own, but they accumulate. Over time, they create a pattern of behavior that reinforces belief. That belief becomes identity, and identity shapes how you show up in every area of your life. One of the strongest truths about action is that it reduces fear. Fear thrives in inaction because the mind fills the gap with imagined scenarios. But when you act, you interrupt that cycle. You replace imagination with reality. Often, you discover that the situation is not as overwhelming as it seemed. And even when it is challenging, you gain something valuable. You gain experience. Experience builds competence, and competence strengthens confidence. There is also a deeper level to this process. When you consistently take action, you begin to trust yourself. Self-trust is one of the most powerful forms of confidence because it is not dependent on external outcomes. It is based on the knowledge that you will show up, that you will try, and that you will continue even when things are difficult. This kind of confidence is stable because it is rooted in behavior, not in temporary results. Another important aspect is that action creates momentum. The first step is often the hardest because it requires breaking through resistance, but once you start, it becomes easier to continue. Each action fuels the next. This momentum reduces hesitation and increases consistency. And consistency is what turns effort into progress. Without action, even the best intentions remain ideas. With action, ideas become results. There is a tendency to underestimate the power of imperfect action. Many people delay because they want everything to be right before they begin. They want clarity, certainty, and assurance. But waiting for perfect conditions often leads to no action at all. Progress does not require perfection, it requires movement. When you allow yourself to start without having everything figured out, you create opportunities to learn, adjust, and improve along the way. Action also changes how you see challenges. Instead of viewing them as obstacles, you begin to see them as part of the process. Each challenge becomes a chance to develop new skills, to strengthen resilience, and to expand your capacity. This shift in perspective makes it easier to stay committed because difficulties are no longer seen as signs to stop, but as steps to grow. The more you act, the more you expand your comfort zone. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once felt impossible becomes achievable. This expansion creates new possibilities because you are no longer limited by the same boundaries. You begin to aim higher, take bigger risks, and pursue goals that once felt out of reach. Confidence built through action is not loud or temporary. It is steady and grounded. It does not rely on constant validation or perfect outcomes. It is reinforced every time you choose to move forward despite uncertainty. It is strengthened every time you follow through. And over time, it becomes a natural part of who you are, shaping your decisions, your mindset, and your ability to create meaningful progress in your life. Surround yourself with strength, because the environment you place yourself in quietly shapes the person you become. Every conversation, every influence, every expectation around you either expands your mindset or limits it. People often underestimate how deeply their surroundings affect their thinking, their confidence, and their decisions. Yet the truth is simple and powerful. You do not grow in isolation. You grow in alignment with what you are consistently exposed to. There is a strong pattern in human behavior. Individuals begin to mirror the standards of the people they spend the most time with. If you are surrounded by hesitation, doubt becomes familiar. If you are surrounded by ambition, growth becomes normal. This is not about copying others. It is about absorbing energy, perspective, and belief systems that gradually shape your own. Over time, what once felt difficult begins to feel expected because the environment has redefined what is normal. Strength is not just about confidence or success. It is about mindset. It is about being around people who take responsibility, who act with intention, who challenge themselves even when it is uncomfortable. When you are in that kind of environment, excuses lose their power. You begin to see what is possible through the actions of others. You begin to realize that limitations are often self-created, reinforced by the company you keep. One of the most overlooked realities is that weak environments do not always appear negative. Sometimes they feel comfortable, supportive in a surface level way, and easy to stay in. But comfort without growth creates stagnation. It keeps you in a cycle where you are not challenged, where your potential is not tested, and where your progress slows down without you even noticing it. Strength, on the other hand, may feel demanding at times. It may push you, question you, and require more from you. But that is exactly what creates transformation. There is also a level of accountability that comes from surrounding yourself with strength. When you are around people who are committed to growth, you naturally hold yourself to a higher standard. You become more aware of your actions, your habits, and your choices. This awareness leads to better decisions because you are no longer operating in a space where mediocrity feels acceptable. You are operating in a space where effort, discipline, and consistency are expected. Another important shift happens in how you handle challenges. In a strong environment, setbacks are not seen as reasons to stop. They are seen as part of the process. You are reminded that difficulty is normal, that failure is temporary, and that persistence is what leads to progress. This collective mindset makes it easier to keep moving forward because you are not carrying the weight of challenges alone. You are supported by a shared belief in growth. Strength also brings perspective. When you are surrounded by people who think bigger, act bolder, and aim higher, your own vision expands. Goals that once seemed unrealistic begin to feel attainable. Ideas that once felt risky begin to feel necessary. This expansion is critical because it breaks the invisible limits that often hold people back. It shows you that there is more available than what you have experienced so far. It is important to recognize that surrounding yourself with strength is a choice. It requires intention. It may require stepping away from environments that no longer serve your growth. It may require seeking out new connections, new conversations, and new influences that align with where you want to go. This is not always easy, but it is necessary for long-term development. There is also a responsibility that comes with this choice. As you grow, you become part of someone else's environment. You contribute to the energy, the mindset, and the expectations around you. This means that surrounding yourself with strength is not just about what you receive, it is also about what you give. You begin to elevate others as you elevate yourself, creating a cycle of growth that extends beyond you. The people around you influence what you believe is possible, what you expect from yourself, and how you respond to challenges. When you choose to be in an environment of strength, you align yourself with progress. You position yourself in a space where growth is not occasional, it is continuous. And over time, that consistency reshapes your identity, your standards, and your ability to move forward with clarity and purpose become the example. Not the exception, because real impact is not measured by how far one person rises alone, but by how many others begin to rise because they saw what was possible through you. Being the exception may feel powerful in the moment. It may look like success that stands out, but it often remains isolated. Being the example creates something deeper. It creates a standard that others can follow, repeat, and build upon. There is a strong truth that shapes influence. People do not change because they are told to change. They change because they see what change looks like in action. Words can inspire, but consistent behavior creates belief. When someone witnesses a person showing up with discipline, acting with courage, and staying committed through difficulty, it removes doubt. It replaces uncertainty with proof. That proof becomes a reference point, something real that others can connect to and learn from. Many people unknowingly aim to be exceptions. They want to achieve something rare, something that separates them from others, something that makes them stand out. But when success is treated as something rare, it reinforces the idea that it is not accessible to everyone. It creates distance instead of connection. Becoming the example shifts that perspective. It shows that growth is not reserved for a few. It is available to anyone willing to commit to the process. There is also a responsibility that comes with becoming the example. It requires consistency, not perfection. It requires showing up even when it is inconvenient, even when it is difficult, even when no one is watching. Because the power of an example is not built in a single moment, it is built over time. It is built through repeated actions that align with values. This consistency creates trust, and trust is what makes influence lasting. Another important aspect is that being the example makes your journey relatable. When people can see the effort, the setbacks, and the progress, they begin to understand that growth is not a straight path. They see that challenges are part of the process, not signs to stop. This removes the illusion that success requires perfection. It replaces it with the understanding that persistence is what truly matters. There is a deeper level of impact that comes from this mindset. When you become the example, you begin to shift the expectations within your environment. What once seemed uncommon starts to feel achievable. Standards rise because people begin to see more as possible. This creates a ripple effect where growth becomes shared rather than isolated. It moves from being an individual achievement to a collective shift in mindset. Being the example also strengthens your own identity. When you know that your actions are not just affecting you, but also influencing others, it creates a stronger sense of accountability. You become more intentional with your choices. You align your actions with your values more consistently. This alignment builds a deeper level of confidence because you are not just acting for results, you are acting with purpose. There's a powerful distinction between recognition and impact. Recognition focuses on being seen, being acknowledged, being noticed. Impact focuses on what changes because of your actions. Becoming the example is rooted in impact. It is not about standing above others. It is about lifting the standard for everyone. It is about creating something that continues even when you are not present. It is important to understand that becoming the example does not require perfection or extraordinary talent. It requires commitment to growth, willingness to act, and the courage to stay consistent. Small actions repeated over time become visible. They create patterns that others can follow. They turn ideas into something tangible. This is how influence is built in a way that lasts. The shift from exception to example changes everything. It transforms success from something rare into something repeatable. It turns individual progress into shared progress. It creates a path that others can walk, rather than a result that others can only admire. And when that happens, growth is no longer limited to one person. It becomes a movement that continues to expand, driven by actions that speak louder than any words ever could.